Thank you, Doug. Hi, everybody. My name is Jim. I'm an alcoholic. I'm glad to be here and glad to see all of you here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Our joke maven, Audrey, has graced us with some pretty good stuff tonight. I think if I can find it. Where did I put it, Audrey? Oh, here it is. Okay. Let's see. Audrey has labeled this as 5 things that sound dirty in law, but really aren't. Number 1, is it a penal offense? Number 2, for $200 an hour, she'd better be good. Number 3, have you looked through her briefs? That's pretty good, Audrey. I didn't realize that you had this kind of a mind, honey. We'll get this one. Number 4, can you get her to drop her suit? Oh, yeah. And, number 5, Sydney, you better leave the handcuffs on. Okay. Now, who's Sydney? It's nice of you to personalize that joke for us, Audrey. Thank you. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at the 3rd step. I'd like to also remind you that that the group conscience decided that we would approach these steps from the standpoint of those who wish to carry the message. That it was so incumbent upon us, in order for us to maintain our sobriety and our spiritual fitness, that we carry the message to other alcoholics, that it would be helpful if we were looking at these steps not just from the standpoint of working them ourselves, but also carrying the message. In line with that, a couple of years ago, at the request of a minister friend of mine, I wrote a document which we called the 12 Steps for Christians. And later reformatted the document so that it was now a 12-step guide for sponsors. And this is the guide. What I'm going to try to do is to get about 100 copies made of this so that everybody will be able to have a copy. And it takes you literally step by step through teaching the steps, everything along the way that needs to be done. And of course it comes out of my experience, but it's taken from the big book, and it follows precisely what we learn here in this meeting. So I hope to have those for you next week. All right, tonight then, looking at the 3rd step. First of all, I think it's important for us to recognize what the 3rd step is and conversely what it is not. The 3rd step defines itself, that it is a decision, that we are making a decision to turn our life and our will over to the care of God as we understand Him. That's very important to recognize the distinction between a decision and the ultimate conclusion of that decision. This decision has 2 heads. First of all, that we will commit ourselves to God, and we do that by way of prayer, but also that we are committing ourselves to go forward with the rest of the steps, recognizing that until we have done that, we have not been freed from those things which block us off from God. We're going to be making an unconditional surrender. And in order for us to effectuate that surrender, it is absolutely imperative that we be freed from those things which block us, from the wreckage of our past. When we look at the steps, and take a look at the language in the Big Book, it becomes quite clear what needs to happen here. Especially, for example, on page 77 in the 9th step, it tells us this, that at the moment we are trying to set our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. And it tells us that our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. This language appears in the 9th step, and it's appropriate there because it is in working the 9th step that we are finally freed from all those things which have blocked us off from God. We have been freed from our defects of character, of course, because we've worked the 4th and 5th and 7th steps. And now, going to the 9th step, we have commenced the process of being freed from our guilt and remorse and shame that built up over the years because of the things that we did that harmed other people. Somewhere along the middle of working and handling those amends that we must make, we find that the promises which follow the 9th step and the more specific promises which we find in and around the 10th step have come true. It is at this point that we realize that we have entered the world of the Spirit and that we have become God conscious and that we have been restored to sanity and that we've developed that vital 6th sense so that we have the ability now to be inspired and to communicate on some level with our higher power. And all of this has happened because we did the work of the steps following the 3rd step. Therefore, we must understand that the 3rd step is an intermediary, it's an intermediate step along the way toward a spiritual awakening. It is not the step by which we stay sober. It is not the step by which we grow spiritually. We have to understand where we are at the point of the 3rd step. We are at that point blocked off by our defects and our guilts. And it's going to be necessary for us, following our commitment to do so, to do all those things necessary to set ourselves free so that we can accept God in our lives and accept His direction and control and actually make the surrender that we have been promising and asking for in our 3rd step. It's also imperative that we understand that the 12 steps are a pathway to surrender. And this, people are always talking about, I took my will back, or I surrendered and then I stopped being surrendered. And when I take the 3rd step, I have to surrender. Well, that's fine. I don't have any problem, I guess none of us do, with somebody making a full unconditional surrender at any time along the road. But a surrender which does not include the ability to be inspired by God or to have God come into our lives and actually direct and control our lives would seem to be a vain and useless act. So we have to understand that we're working from a place of rebellion and defiance, and that's where we came in, not to speak of denial. And the steps are going to take us to a place of surrender and obedience. In other words, we're going to seek God by working the steps. And in doing so, we're going to come to a place where we are going to be freed from our insanities, and we're going to be in close contact with our higher power. We're going to get close to God. That's the requirement. Remember now what we're working for here, and we're going to look at this even more closely later on. What we're working for here is to get close to God, to be freed from the things which block us from God, and then from there on through the rest of our lives to stay close to God. Remember the 11th step, that we seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. This means then, of course, that we have achieved the conscious contact. And this is going to take time and effort. Also, it's important to understand that the third step prayer is almost identical to the seventh step prayer. The language is a bit different, but the prayer is the same. There's a huge difference, though. Because when we get to the seventh step, we have done the work necessary to find out what it is that's blocking us. And so when we go to God in the seventh step and ask Him to take away these defects, we know what we're talking about. We've done the work. We found them and we admitted them. And now we take them to God, and now that process really works for us. I'm sorry to be making such a positive approach to this, but I think it's important because, and I'll tell you why. Over the years, I have seen so many people get stuck on that third step. And if you ask them, how are you doing? Where are you in the steps? Well, I'm working on the third step. And how long have you been doing that? Oh, about a year. And I say to myself, and sometimes to them if I have permission to do so, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of the fourth step, and the fifth step, and the ninth step? Why aren't you finding out what's wrong with you? Why aren't you following the directions in the big book? Well, and then there's all kinds of excuses. But someone who has worked the second step and has come to believe that there is a power out there greater than themselves which can restore them to sanity has to make one more leap of faith, one more leap of understanding that it is imperative and time to let God have all of us so that we can recover. And the big book makes no bones about it. Just think about what we've learned already up to the point of the third step. We have learned almost all the material which is contained in the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. There is a solution, more about alcoholism and we agnostics. Not in great detail if we're new, but we've learned enough about the material in those chapters to be familiar with where we're going and what we have to do here and what's going on here. And the language which we have studied and the language which we have used, which has helped us to come to believe and to come to that place where we could admit our alcoholism. That same language now applies across the board for the rest of our lives, and it applies in particular to the third step, where we're going to have to finally make up our minds here which way we're going to go. Just as an example, in the second chapter, on page 25, we learned that if we're a real alcoholic, we have but two choices. One is to go on to the bitter end, and the other to accept spiritual help. Those are our choices. And people get up here and they say, well, I've got choices today. Yes, you have. You have the choice to go on to the bitter end or to accept spiritual help. Those are your choices. Over and over again, we hear the same thing. Remember that the big book does not have any weasel words in it. It does not equivocate. It doesn't get into comparative stuff. Now, a lot of these forms that are out there floating around are based on comparative stuff. For example, I'm going to compare my faults with my mother's faults and see which one of us has the greater faults, which is not at all what the fourth step is designed to do. So the big book is filled with categorical imperatives. That means absolutes. It does not speak in terms other than absolute. It says this is what we did. And now it's pretty important for us to remember that it's easy for me to speak absolutely about something I have done. Remember what happened when this book was written. This book is a recitation of the actions taken by those who helped to write the book, the ones who came before. Remember what they said? To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered. It's the main object of this book. And so if I'm saying to you, this is what I did, then by golly, this is what I did. And I'm saying to you, I believe that if you do what I did, you'll have the results that I had, that you will recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And you will have full remission from the disease of alcoholism, and you'll have a life beyond anything you could ever imagine for yourself. And all of these promises will come true, and you will become God conscious. You will be restored to sanity. And you will be empowered to carry this message and help other people, and to finally in your entire life to have a mission, a purpose for your living, which most of us never had. You're born, life's a bitch, and you die, so what? Let's go out and chase all the pleasure we can find. Let's survive the best we can. Because there's no meaning to life. We can make all kinds of romantic meanings to life, but those romantic notions pass away very quickly. When you get to be my age, the romantic stuff pretty well disappears. Pity to say. Not what I would like, but it's what's happened. Now, so anything that I had that looked like a romantic vision of life is a chimera. It doesn't exist. It goes away. But what are we looking for? We're looking for enduring values. I don't know if any of you read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. But it's very instructive, because this man was out looking for God. And he tried to find God in the forest with all of the mendicants out there, the people, the flagellants who were denying themselves everything. That didn't work. He tried to find God as a beggar, carrying his begging bowl around. And that didn't work. And Siddhartha, by the way, was the son of very high priests in his country. And he was destined for the priesthood. But he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to find God. After being a beggar for a long time, and that didn't work, then he decided he would find out how the other side lived, and he got into society, and he hooked up with a very wealthy woman, and he lived the rich life, and that didn't work. But one day, when he was crossing a river, he started talking to the ferryman who spent his life on the sides of that river helping travelers to cross both ways. And suddenly it came to him, if I'm to find God, I will find God only through service to others. If you want to know the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's it. Because our mission, our purpose in life, the reason God got us here in the first place, is so that we can be of maximum service to Him and the people about us. Just before Dr. Bob died, he gave us and left us his last message. What did he say Alcoholics Anonymous was all about? It's love and service. And this doesn't mean serving coffee, although that's nice. It means carrying God's message, serving others with God's message and with anything else that we can do that might be helpful to them. And we do this without expectation of any kind of return whatsoever. Because we're dealing here with a spiritual dynamic. At the moment that we begin to expect something in return, or the moment we begin to do things expecting certain results which we demand will happen, we're clear off base. It doesn't work. When we do what we do to help others without expectation of any return whatsoever, and we leave the results entirely up to God, that's when it all works and it all comes together. Now, when we look at the third step, we're looking at a step which says, okay, here is where we begin this process. We're going to go beyond that which we have always done. You see, if you want to boil AA down to the simplest possible equation, what we do here is we find out what did not work. And then we find out what will work. And then we start doing what will work, and our whole life changes. You see, it all comes back down to what we do. Doesn't have a thing in the world to do with us sitting around and surfing through channels or waiting for osmosis to seep in through our pinpoint brains. That doesn't work. What we do is we get out there and we sweat and strain. Body's all aching and racked with pain. And remember what Old Man River does? He just keeps rolling along. And that's what we do. We ease on down. And we keep on keeping on. And when we do that, magically, miraculously, the promises in the big book come true. They just do. You see, the promises in the big book are nothing more nor less than the inevitable result of working the steps. What does it say? They will always materialize if we work for them. And that's the truth. What does it say? That this has happened automatically. We're restored to sanity automatically. Why? Because we sought God through working the steps. We sought to clear away the wreckage of our past through the working of the steps, through taking one leap of faith after another, through doing the work which would first find and then admit and then be freed from those things in ourselves which are blocking us from God. Amazing stuff. And then, at every meeting we hear chapter 5 being read. There's some incredible lessons in chapter 5, the part that we read. Not once does it say, oh golly gee whiz, it might be kind of nice if you sort of did this. Starts right out by telling us that we're not going to recover if we are unable or unwilling to be honest with ourselves. Then it goes on to tell us that if we have decided that we want what we have seen around us and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then, right then, not a year later, but then, we're ready to take certain steps. We know that that's true. The big book does not fool around. Doesn't have any of these cockamamie ideas that you can wait a year to start your first step, and doesn't matter, all you got to do is just keep going to meetings. Call your sponsor every day, go to meetings and don't drink. Well, what about reading the book? What about experiencing this learning process which teaches me that I must concede to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic, and that I must come to believe and to accept as a fact that I can no longer drink alcohol successfully for the rest of my life, that the plug is in the jug. What happened to that? What happened to the understanding which we achieve by reading the 7th chapter of this book, which tells us that at the second meeting with a newcomer, that newcomer having read the book, and they having evidenced their intent to go through with the steps, so we take them immediately to the steps. What happened to that? Why do we ignore that? I don't know. There's so many myths floating around out there, so much going on that sometimes it's hard to keep up with it because these things come fast and furiously. We learned from upstate New York that we only need to take one step a year. I mean, I guess there are people who honestly believe that's so. Now I keep hearing things like, well, it takes 5 years just for the cobwebs to clear up. And when I hear that, I ask a person, how in the hell do you think the big book got written? The longest sobriety in the fellowship at that time was 3.5 years, and half the people didn't have a year's yet. How do you suppose it got written if the cobwebs don't clear up for 5 years? I mean, this stuff goes on and on and on and on. We open up the book, we find out what the book says, we follow the directions in the book, and what happens? It says if we have carefully followed directions, we will have commenced to sense the flow of His Spirit into us, and we will become God conscious, and we will have a spiritual awakening. Isn't that why we're here? Have we not learned that the spiritual awakening is the sine qua non of recovery? Without that, we have none. We don't recover in little pieces. What does the big book say in the 5th chapter? It tells us that half measures avail us nothing. We don't get half recovery. It tells us that the results are nil until we let go absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't say, gee, it'd be kind of nice if we let go a little bit, kind of loosen up the strings here a bit and let God kind of pull a couple of your strings, but you can reserve most of it to yourself if you like. Tells us that we are powerless, but that there is one who has all power. That one is God. It expresses the fond hope. Maybe you find him now. And so we have all of these lessons. And we've learned them, or should have learned them, as we went through those first 4 chapters in the doctor's opinion and the first part of chapter 5. And then, when we get to the end of chapter 5, the reading of chapter 5, what do we find? We find 3 pertinent ideas. If you have your book, open it up to page 60, please. We need to take a look at these 3 pertinent ideas in a very critical way. Let's parse them and let's see what they're really saying to us. Bottom of page 60. So we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. Notice that this does not say that our lives had become unmanageable. It says we could not manage our own lives. Notice how it's switching gears. Because it now puts the emphasis upon our attempts to be the manager of our lives. You see, and we're going to be learning very quickly how futile that truly has been. We have admitted our alcoholism before we got to this place, haven't we? That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. This is a very important statement because it sets the stage for what we must do. If we're trying to help somebody else, we're trying, of course, desperately to help ourselves as well. We have to remember that we have been bombarded with human solutions. When I came in, there were very, very few drying out places. And then in the next 10 years, the proliferation of treatment centers and people who began to see the dollar signs that this huge pool of alcoholics represented out there. If you could just get into that business, there was an unlimited source of customers, clients. Now, a lot of these people are extremely dedicated and have had long years of schooling, and they truly believe what they're doing. The problem is that what they are suggesting to us, what they practice, and what they foist off on us is a human solution, which doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Never has worked. Never will work. And it's easy to see why. We're not dealing here with a problem of psychology. We're not even dealing with a problem of physical weakness or disease, except in a certain limited way. The truth is that we're dealing with a spiritual problem. We're dealing with spiritual bankruptcy. We're dealing with the effects of powerlessness. And we're dealing especially with the effects of overwhelming fear, which has warped and perverted our very psyches, our very souls. And the solution to spiritual bankruptcy, obviously, is that we need to retrieve or to finally come to a point of spiritual awareness. We have to become spiritually fit. We have to have a spiritual awakening. And that's where our salvation lies. That's where we're going to find remission from this dreaded disease, which is incurable and invariably fatal and progressive. And so, knowing that, we do not have any disdain for our well-meaning folks on the outside who wish to help us. But if you're working with somebody who's new, who's been through 4 treatment centers and comes in telling you that they're absolutely convinced that they're only as sick as their secrets, and that the purpose of an AA meeting has to be the same as the purpose of their encounter groups, and the chairman of the meeting is a facilitator, and there's all kinds of stuff going on here that has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the recovery program of the 12 steps. And somehow or another we have to find a way to disabuse them of this, to get them to understand what they're doing here. And we have no problem with anybody who wants to use human solutions, and if that's their choice, that's fine. But what we have to constantly keep in mind is that we're dealing here with a solution which resides in 12 steps, which are spiritual steps. They are spiritual principles, pure and simple. There is no spiritual part of this program. It's all spiritual. From A to Z, from Alpha to Omega. And it is based upon concepts and principles which have been known to mankind since forever. And written about in thousands of different books and preached from millions of different pulpits. And yet, for the very first time in human history, these same spiritual principles have been restated as steps of action. Think what that means. We can incorporate these great spiritual principles that men have been chasing all their lives by simply working 12 steps. Because by doing that, we incorporate these principles into our very being. They become a part of us. They become the way we live our lives. What's it say in the 12th step? Practice these principles in all our affairs. The Big Book tells us the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. And then finally, let's look at the last sentence. That God can and will. God could and would if he were sought. A powerful, powerful statement, a direct promise. That God will restore our sanity. God will remove from us the obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol if we but seek him. Now in the second step, we learned that God could do all this, but now in the third step, it says God will do it if we seek him. And if someone asks you, but how do I go about seeking God? Do I have to redouble my efforts at church? Do I have to change churches? Or do I have to join an ashram and begin a process of Buddhist meditation? How do I do this? How do I seek God? Do I have to be like Siddhartha and go out and try every different form of life? Fortunately, no. But what you do have to do is work the steps. So you want to know how to seek God? Work the steps. That's what they're there for. The 12 steps take us from a place of rebellion, defiance, and denial to a place of surrender and obedience. And because that works that way, we become spiritually fit. And when we are spiritually fit, we are immune to alcohol and drugs and all the other things that would tear our lives apart. Because we have entered a place where God has removed from us these obsessions and compulsions, and where even more so than that, the problem has been removed. It is gone. It does not exist for us. And we've been restored to sanity. And now we are close to God, and now our job is to stay close to God and perform his work well, ergo, steps 10, 11, and 12. That's what they're there for. And that's what they do, and that's the way they work. Provided we are disciplined and consistent in working those steps. So that brings us up then to the first two words following the three pertinent ideas, being convinced. And now we know what that means. Being convinced of all of those things that came before. Being convinced that all of those categorical statements, those musts, are true. And having accepted that this is a program we wish to work, having accepted as truth that the 12 steps have worked for others, and having come to fervently hope that they will work the same for us, and having made our decision that we're going to go forward with the steps, we're at step 3. It's an unconditional promise that God will give us everything we need. And that's what this program is. We first do what is necessary to get close to God, then we do what is necessary to stay close to God, and then we perform His work well, and then we enjoy all of the fruits of the program. See how simple that is? And all of this has to do with our willingness to work the steps, the effort that we put in. Going on, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. You see that what's happening here is that this selfishness and self-centeredness is taken from us, isn't it? You remember, we're going to be asking that of God when we get into the third step prayer. Why? Because this is utterly essential. In order for us to accept God in our lives, we have to be free of self. Our focus must be upon others and how we can be helpful to them. It is only through that we achieve our goal, which is spiritual progress and spiritual enlightenment. Bill said it in his story. If an alcoholic failed to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain low spots ahead, and he would drink again. This is a paradox. We are people wander around here and they say this is a selfish program. Can you imagine? Selfishness and self-centeredness is our problem. Holy cow. This program is utterly unselfish. And if it is not, we just missed the boat entirely. We might just as well step off the end of the pier and drown ourselves. See how that works? I don't know why we get caught up in this stuff. If I say to you, this is a selfish program, that excuses every selfish act I want to do. Yeah, what are you worrying about? This is a selfish program. It's not. And if it is, shame on you and bye-bye. We may see you later, sport. But what's going to happen is that we will become less and less interested in ourselves. More and more we become interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. And when we get the 11-step inventory, don't you think we're going to be looking at this every night? When we answer those questions, one of the questions is, was I thinking of myself most of the time? Or was I thinking what I could contribute to life? What I could do for others? And what I could pack into the stream of life instead of taking? If self and selfishness is our principal block to recovery, why in the world would we want to continue to practice selfishness? Doesn't make any sense at all. In the Big Book, it's contrary entirely to the Big Book. Then it goes on to say, as we felt new power flow in. Now, you see, when we read chapter 4, it tells us clearly that lack of power is our dilemma. We are powerless. God has all power and all knowledge. When we get to the 10th step, we find this stated precisely. And in the beautiful paragraphs between the 10th and 11th step, it tells us that God is the one who has all knowledge and power. And that if we have carefully followed directions, we have commenced to sense the flow of His power into us. Which means that we have done those things necessary to unblock ourselves from God. And then it says, to some extent, we've become God conscious, and we've developed a vital sixth sense. And all of these things come about because we have worked the steps, and the steps have led us from a place of selfishness and self-centeredness and resentment and dishonesty and fear to a place of selflessness and service and staying close to God and performing His work well. And therefore, we're going to feel new power flow in as we enjoyed peace of mind, which probably most of us have never had. Can you imagine what it must feel like to have a restful and peaceful mind? No more anxieties, no more terrors, no more terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. And that's what we get to have. As we discovered we could face life successfully. Holy cow. Just think back, when we look at our inventory, we realize that we have never been able to do that. Every once in a while we had little triumphs here and there. Some of us had a lot of those. But down deep inside of us, we knew we didn't deserve them because we were out there skating. God gave us great talents and great abilities, and we only used a 10th% of them because that's all we had to do in order to get by. And yet we were constantly looking for acclaim and for honors, and we wanted everyone to love us and think we were wonderful people. And when they didn't, we were really angry with them. There was a good cause for resentment right there. As we became conscious of His presence, remember what it tells us in the 4th chapter again, that we're going to find God deep down inside ourselves. That's the only place He could be found. What does it tell us when we get to the 10th step on page 85? That we became God conscious. And we commenced to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. You see what's happening here? And that's why we know that this paragraph speaks in the future. And we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. Some people have asked me, what does this mean that we're not going to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter until we have achieved this spiritual awakening, until we have achieved full surrender? Because we look at the 4th step and it says that our fears at once begin to leave us, and then in the 5th step it tells us that our fears fall from us. That's true. That's talking about the fears we brought in with us. Remember that the 10th step is based and bottomed on the simple idea, the knowledge that the world and all of its people will continue to threaten us. That fear is going to be a part of our everyday living because of these threats. And that fear always translates to character defects, dishonesty, selfishness, and resentments. And so that therefore every day we have to be aware of the effects of the threats of life as they intrude upon us. And we need to take care of them on the spot so that they don't take root. Gradually what happens is this. Now this has happened to me, so I know it will for you. Our faith grows so strong that we literally almost never have fear. There's just very little contriteness anymore. We get more guts in a slaughterhouse. We can go anywhere and do anything knowing that God is there. We have come to trust Him implicitly and explicitly, you see. And faith and fear cannot live in the same house. So as our faith grows, our fears subside. There comes a time when we can literally say, and mean it, that when we feel afraid, it's a direct insult to God. We're saying to Him, God, I don't trust you. And so our fears of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter, we will begin to lose them. And as time goes by, we will seldom have fear anymore. I'm not talking now about the kind of fear that is engendered by somebody with a loaded .44 Magnum in our head about to pull a trigger, or a bus barreling down the street about to T-bone us out in the middle of the intersection. I'm not talking about that. That's no different than the deer out in the forest when the tiger's about to leap. That deer isn't going to just sit there and tremble and say, okay, Mr. Tiger, I'm your dinner. You're going to jump like hell and run like hell. And we're born with that. Flight or fight. We're talking about those fears that we manufacture because of some perception of threat. The phantoms that reside only in our heads, that we cannot deal with ourselves, that we must have God's help with. And then finally, we were reborn. This is not in AA, this is not the rebirth that is spoken of by some religions. Although for each individual member here, it may very well be that that is their belief, and that's wonderful. But if you are not of that religious bent, please do not be dismayed. Please teach the people you're working with not to be dismayed, because here it means a rebirth of thinking. We are powerless over our thinking. Our minds are twisted, perverted, and bent out of shape by all the fears that we have experienced. And next week, when we get into the fourth step, we're going to look at this very closely so that we can see what has actually happened there. Suffice it to say that our so-called defects of character are nothing more nor less than natural instincts warped and perverted by fear. So they no longer function for us and in our benefit, but they function against us and destroy us, and destroy our relationships, and are eating us alive. And so we need to be free of them. If it is true, and I believe it to be true, then that our rebirth is a rebirth of thinking, then what's going to happen here is that our mind, which we can liken to a swimming pool which has gone untended for years. That swimming pool is full of crap and corruption and all sorts of algae and nasty stuff, and it stinks to high heaven. It's kind of yellowish and greenish at the same time. And we poured all sorts of chemicals in there, and nothing did any good, and we couldn't swim in it, we couldn't drink it, we sure as hell wouldn't have our friends come over to swim in it. That's our mind when we walk in the door. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull a plug, drain all that stuff out, wash down the sides, wash around the sides, fill it with nice, new, fresh, clean water. A new way of thinking, a new way of acting, a whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. And then we're going to keep it clean and sparkling and fresh for the rest of our lives. And we're going to do that, not with chemicals, with prayer. Staying close to God, performing His work well. And that's all it takes. Now then, let's look at the third step prayer. Many of us said to ourselves, to our Maker, as we understood Him, God as we understood Him. This is a very interesting phrase. Let's think about that just for a second. I think it's probably fair to say that if you went up to anyone who's been around here for a while and asked them to describe God to you, if you were to ask anyone, what is this God of your understanding? Explain your understanding to me. For most of us, the answer will be, this is what God has done for me. I can explain God, my understanding of God, simply as the experiences I've had of God working in my life. I do not have the experience of having seen God face to face. I may have had some dreams or visions, but basically my understanding of God, you see, the big book doesn't make the mistake of saying God as I define Him, God as I understand Him. Now, my understanding of God has been derived primarily from my experiencing of Him working in my life. And my faith is the product of that experience. I have come to know and to believe in my innermost soul that I can trust God. Faith without works is dead. To work with faith, I must trust. And when I trust, I work with faith. And when I trust and work with faith, I become effective and I'm taking my faith and making use of it, and it grows with me instead of wilting away, atrophying. And so many of us have that happen to us. In the 10th step, it says that we are to grow in understanding and effectiveness. The growth of understanding is in the growth of our understanding of God and His power and His place in this world and His place in our lives, and how we are to meld our lives in with His will. How we're to get in His pocket and stay there. And effectiveness means effectiveness in carrying the message. That's our job. That's our purpose. That's our holy mission. That's why we're here. And any of us who have not come to that conclusion yet, it's a pretty good idea to think hard and long about this. Otherwise, you may have to decide that you have such special merit that God could not restrain Himself. He just had to get you sober. Probably not so. But we're here because He wants us here. We're here because of His grace, and He has plans for us, guys. But we have to cooperate with those plans. Our job is to do the things that are necessary to fit ourselves, be a maximum service to God and the people about us. And so we grow in understanding and effectiveness. Now here, we're praying to God as we understood Him. The first sentence of the prayer, God. There's not, notice that it's just God, starts right out with God. Doesn't say, oh, holy AA group, or my dear pickup truck, or my revered doorknob. When we stop and think about that stuff is so silly. It doesn't even really deserve a lot of comment, does it? How about, let's see, God, it says here. Does that mean good, orderly direction? Now, let's see how that would sound. Good orderly direction. I offer myself to Thee. See, none of this stuff makes sense. We're talking about the God of our understanding. The power, this greater power, as we understand that power. The God of our own choosing. Nevertheless, a deity. There's no mistake about that in the big book. All this stuff is things that we've superimposed upon AA. So we go back. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Do you see any reservations there? Does it say you can build with me and do with me as Thou wilt, except in these three areas, God? I reserve these specifically for myself. Don't mess with my sex life. I want to choose where I go to work and where I live. Otherwise than that, you can do with me as you want. You notice that this is an unconditional offer. It's exactly the same if I said to Carol, Carol, I'll give you $25 if you run down to Commercial and back. If she runs down to Commercial and back, I owe her $25. No doubt about that. It's a contract, and she has performed. This is an offer. I offer myself to Thee. Here I am, God. Use me. Use me, please. An offer must be accepted. We are not acceptable yet. Don't we see that? Because we're still blocked off from Him. That's why when we do our third step, we are committing ourselves to go forward with the rest of the steps. And what we are doing here is offering ourselves. This third step is not going to keep anybody sober. Not for long. We may kid ourselves thinking that it will. How many times do you hear somebody say, I'm working on my third step? How long have you been doing it? 9 months? What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of your fourth step? How many times in those 9 months have you said the prayer? Oh, I don't know, about 120. You said the prayer 120 times. Don't you suppose God has heard you at least one of those times? And if He heard you, what more do you have to do? What is, you suppose God is deaf? Anyway, there's so many things that we do that just simply don't make sense. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. If I find myself in the outback of Australia running a cattle station with only the Aborigines for company a year from now, and it's your will that I be there, I know I'll be happy as a clam at high tide. Thank you very much, God. We don't think that's probably going to happen, but what if it does? Because this offer is without reservations of any kind. Next sentence. Relieve me of the bondage of self. We just got through on the page before this finding out what this self stuff was all about. That this is the killer. That we have to be free of it. That we can't do this on our own. And here we are immediately thereafter going to God and saying, God, please, relieve me of the bondage of self. Not so that I can be healthy, wealthy, and wise and have a house on the bay and a 50-foot Matthews and a trophy blonde and a big bank account. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. You see, we recognize when we say this, that when we are filled with self, we cannot do God's will effectively. And so, the big book, is always consistent. These prayers always lead to one conclusion, that we are fitting ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's what we're doing here. This next sentence, and by the way, this next sentence in the third step prayer is going to be answered in the 12th step. Take away my difficulties. Difficulties here means defects of character and shortcomings. It means insanities. It means guilt and remorse and shame. All of these things that are my difficulties, please take them away. So that the victory over them that you give me, God, may bear witness to those I would help. God, please make me an example by removing from me the things which block me from you, so that I can be helpful to others through my example. That I may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life, not mine. This is not a prayer to ask God to reveal to others our greatness and our merit and our wonderfulness and our guruism and how great we are because we got 37 years of sobriety. Baloney. Anything that I can do to be an example to you that shows God's power and His love and His way of life working in and through me, that's my job. And I give God all the credit and all the praise and all the glory for that. But you see, here is the most effective tool we have to be helpful to others. By our actions will we be known. And if I am an example to you of God's power working in my life, there's a fighting chance through God's grace that you may see and understand and want what I have. And if you want what I have and you're willing to do what I did to get it, you too can have everything that I've got and more. But you may be willing to do a lot more for it than I've been. Who knows? But nevertheless, my example is the way that I'm going to be helpful to you. And this example is provided me by God. It's not something I can whomp up for myself. And then finally, may I do thy will always. We're going to find this repeated over and over again. God, what do you want me to do next? Show me your will, God, and I'll do what you want. What is it, God, that is your will for me today? Thy will, not mine, be done. This prayer goes with us all the time. And the more we do it, the more we stay surrendered. It is one of the most wonderful things, one of the most wonderful tools we have. And it is so simple and easy to use. We just have to remind ourselves as we go through the day, I'm not God. I'm not the general manager of this universe anymore. God is the Father. I am the child. I need to know what He wants me to do. God, what do you want me to do here? Thy will, not mine, be done. And what a wonderful thing that is. Because it just quiets our mind and it quiets our day and it helps us to focus on what we need to be doing. If you go down in the next paragraph, in the middle of that paragraph, talking about this prayer, the wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. One of the things that always tickles me is people are talking about the only step we have to work perfectly is the first step. That's total nonsense. How can we, what are we going to do not to work the third step? We're going to cut out one of the sentences? Oh, we're going to add our reservations. But wait a minute, it says to work the step, we do it without reservation. What do we do with the seventh step? We'll cut out part of that prayer, or we'll hold back some of our defects and say, God, well, you can have all my defects, but these two, I got to hang on to them. That's not working the seventh step. The seventh step says, ask God to take all of our defects. Now this goes on and on, some of this silliness. Because each of the steps is a categorical imperative. Each of the steps requires of us that we work it thoroughly and completely. There's no pussyfooting around here. There's no weasel words. There are no out clauses. Not in the big book. Human Solutions and New Age AA have all kinds of out clauses and weasel words because they're dealing with comparative spirituality. There is no such thing. It's an oxymoron. Spirituality is either spirituality or it's not. We're either following the dictates of a higher power or we're not. And if we're not, we're clear off base. We're just kidding ourselves, a bunch of self-delusion going on. To make it real clear, the big book tells us that if we have carefully followed directions, we will have commenced to sense the flow of His Spirit into us, and we will have become God conscious. And there isn't any other way that I know of to do it. Now that's the third step, and next week we're going to commence our study of the fourth step. We will probably be on that at least 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. We're going to go into the fourth step in some great detail so that we ought to be able to teach someone else to do it, and if we're working it ourselves, we ought to have a real good idea how to do it. And yes, Howie? Do I have the hands of some people who will help Tom clean up this joint after we're through? 1. Need 2 more. 3, 4. Okay, that's good. We got a whole bunch. We'll get it done for you in a hurry, Tom. Anybody who's taking a chip tonight, anybody who's brand new, been out there taking care of the supplying the gin mills with all your money, would like to get started with us tonight? White chip. Anyone who's just coming back from a sojourn out there, doing more research? Okay. Do we have anyone who has 3 months of sobriety tonight? 6 months sobriety tonight? 9 months sobriety tonight? Yeah, we owe you one. See Janine, she'll help you out. Oh, this is wonderful. I've been watching this young lady as she has progressed spiritually, and she's doing a wonderful job with her life. Let's see now. Did we give Janine a big hand for everything she's been doing for us? Okay, is there anyone who, besides me, who has a birthday in the month of December? AA birthday. How about in the clean room? Anybody in there?
Sir, excuse me, when is your birthday?
December 20th.
How many years?
37 years. Anyone else? Thank you. Let's see. Any announcements for the good of AA?
Yes, my name is Howard, an alcoholic. I'd like to inform everybody, if you do not know, that at 9:15, those who care to stay with us, Jim is doing the traditions from 9:15 to 10 o'clock.
Yeah, we'll be in the clean room in there. So a round table discussion of the, we're going to be on the third tradition night. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Shh, quiet now.
Tomorrow, Serenity Beach is having an all-day picnic and breakfast starting at, I think the meeting is 8 o'clock, and then afterwards at 9, they're having breakfast, lunch, and then at 4 o'clock, they're going to have another one from 4 to 6, and then there's another meeting. It's
Okay.
on 16th Street.
Serenity goes all day tomorrow with breakfast, lunch,
And
meetings,
yeah, meetings, everything.
starting about 8 o'clock.
16th Street is Monmouth.
Huh?
16th Street is Monmouth.
16th and what?
A1A.
16th and A1A. That's at the church there, isn't it?
No, on the beach.
On the beach.
On the beach. You're
Any announcements from you folks in the clean room? If you have, you can come right to the door and make them. Okay, any commercial announcements like dances or bingo parties or whoopee parties or anything like that? All right, now we're going to close the meeting, and you guys in the clean room, we want you out here with us, please. If you have a big book or you have access to one, when you get home, open it up to page 552, 552. And you'll find on that page the solution to what you're asking. It tells you exactly what to do. And if you do that, you will be released and set free. Okay?
You have to qualify the third edition.
No, as a matter of fact, that particular page was changed a little bit, but the quotation we're looking for is still on 552. I checked that out almost first thing because it's a major part of what I teach. Is that, and it goes down to this: when you're praying for somebody, you can't hate them at the same time. It's a spiritual principle. If I'm praying for you, I can't hate you. I may hate you the first 2 or 3 days I pray for you, but if I keep praying for you, the hatred goes away, and it's replaced with love. And you may not want that, but that's tough, man. Because if you want to live with the anger, nobody's going to stop you. But you got to understand that it's a dead poison for you, and it's going to kill you. Okay, Tom, did you have something you want to add?
Mine's Tom, alcoholic. And my first couple years of sobriety, I had to work on that because I couldn't get on anybody. But I had to remember that everybody, including myself, wants to feel a little superior than the next person. Actually, the next person. I remember, and I try to remember that. I don't want to play their games. You know, I just want to do my job. I had a hard time at work. I had a hard time keeping a job. But everybody wanted to show me up, and I was a new guy, and I wanted to show them up. And it's called a problem. And I just do my job. Don't fall into that kind of shit. And with insurance companies, that's the same thing. You know, like, okay, I have to pay that much. I don't know what the situation is. I have no power over that.
You start out with the one person who is causing you the most trouble. Start praying for them, and then just keep going until you get rid of all this stuff because it's a killer. You need to be free of it. Remember that all anger is a result of fear. You're never angry with me unless I threaten you in some way. So you're reacting to threat and your powerlessness and your sense of hopelessness and inability to correct situations with bureaucracy and all the other stuff that goes on. And all that's true. It's all true. It's all happening. Nobody's denying that it's happening to you. What we're saying to you is a long experience has taught us, and the Big Book teaches us, that we cannot live with fear and anger. And anger is a killer. So whatever you do whatever it takes to be free of that anger.
I'm glad it got brought up because we didn't have a chance to do that.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, let us close the meeting. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. We had a real nice meeting out of it. Let's let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Let's have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering. And we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. Please remember, in the stairway group, we don't say anything after we say amen. Thank you. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all so much for being here. Now then, you got to listen closely to this one, guys. Listen very closely. I'm going to try not to stumble over it. A bear walks into a bar in Billings and asks for a beer. The bartender says, "We don't serve beer to bears in Billings." The bear says, "Just give me a damn beer." Bartender says, "Like I said, we don't serve beer to belligerent bears in Billings." The bear says, "If you don't give me a beer, I'm going to eat that woman at the end of the bar." The bartender said, "I told you we don't serve belligerent beers in Billings." So the bear ate the woman. Now the bear says, "I'll give me a beer." The bartender says, "Like I said, we don't serve belligerent drug addict beer to bears in Billings." And the bear says, "I'm not a drug addict." Bartender says, "Yes, you are. That was the bar bitch you ate." Oh my goodness sake. I don't know where we get all this stuff. Now then, on page 108, we have a part of, not only part of chapter 8, but a part of the Big Book, which is really, really important. And it's one of the reasons that it's so important for newcomers to read the entire Big Book. You can go back into Dr. Silkworth's opinion. You can find him talking about the fact that alcoholism is a progressive illness. There's a mention of that in the second chapter, but nowhere does the Big Book define this or give us a roadmap to follow until we get to chapter 8. Would think a most unlikely place for that to be, but that's the way the Big Book is written. It's written as a matter of inspiration. And when Bill was writing chapter 8, writing it for the wives, he felt that it was a good idea to let them know what they were looking at with this drunk husband of theirs, and let them know how the disease progresses from one stage to the next. And also, in order to more fully explore this whole concept of progression, he went on for several more pages fully describing it. Now, for new people, and maybe even for some of us that have been around for a while, if we still have some doubts about whether we really are an alcoholic or not, or maybe we haven't completely found ourselves defined in the big book. This chapter and these few pages, which clearly set forth the elements of the progression of the disease, will help us to identify ourselves. And somewhere within these various progressive elements of the disease we're going to find ourselves. It may be that we will put together 2 or 3 different concepts, but ultimately, if we read this, we're going to see ourselves. I've had a lot of people, I've worked with new people who truly found themselves right here and say, well, I'm not like that, but I did this and this and this and this, and so pretty soon they're beginning to identify rather than to deny. This first husband may or may not be an alcoholic, probably is not. Although, who's to say? There may be other parts of his story which don't quite correspond to this description. But he wouldn't be unusual, you know, here in AA, because there are a lot of people who are members who are not alcoholics. They have a problem with alcohol, and they have a desire to stop drinking. And that's all that's required to be a member. And there's no reason why they shouldn't be. The problem that they pose sometimes, not always, but once in a while, is that they don't have to work the steps to stop drinking. And a few times, once in a while, one of these folks will loudly proclaim that as a fact. Well, that's fine for them. The problem is that almost always some new people sitting around, their ears are big and flapping, you know, and they're hearing say, oh, I don't have to work steps. Well, I say, boy, you didn't have to work steps, I won't have to either. And yet this one who's saying that is an alcoholic of the first water and must work the steps if they are to recover. There are people who are convinced that they're alcoholics when they're born. That the first time they picked up a drink, they drank alcoholically. And that there was no progression to a place where the disease of alcoholism took over. I think most people have found something quite different, and that there, in fact, is a jumping off spot. There is a place where we cross over from where we could stop if we really wanted to where we can't stop. Now, exactly where that's going to be with each individual it's impossible to forecast. But in looking back, in hindsight, we can see what happened. Now here, going to the bottom of page 108, we're looking at husband number 1 now. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he does not see it. Sometimes he is a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessary in his business. Or, if I want to write like Hemingway, I need to be a drunk, because see what it did for him. You can see that the rationalization is already big time with this guy. He would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics after a while. I don't know, did any of you see that article that came out in the paper, I think, first part of this week or late last week? Some kind of a new study that's been done, and they've concluded that there are something like 27 million alcoholics in the United States, and that only about 1.5 million are receiving any kind of treatment. Of course, they don't count AA, do they? So I assume that getting some kind of treatment is the population of the recognized human solution agencies. since nobody has any kind of an accurate count on AA, we cannot, on our own, stop drinking.